The Day of the Rope by Devon Chapter 19. You have to remember why we're in this position in the first place, Arrow said to Ethan, as the two made their way through the dark sewer tunnel. Ethan was exhausted from pushing the heavy wheelbarrow through all the muck and mud that covered the floor of the cavernous shaft. The weight of the wheelbarrow's contents made it awkward to move on dry land, and pushing it through this sludge in the dark was back-breaking work. It seemed as if they had been wandering in the dark for miles now, but Arrow had assured Ethan that they had almost reached the pipeline. Ethan hoped he was right. They had been working all night and were cutting it a little close with this last leg of the plan. Since the invention of mass media, Arrow was saying as he shined his flashlight down the tunnel, even before the internet, people have been becoming not just more propagandized, but also more isolated. Not just socially, but also going out in the real world, applying all this theoretical knowledge. They don't go out and interact with the world. Their understanding of broad issues all comes from media and subversive fiction. What they need to know for their job is very specialized and narrow. They also don't discuss philosophy with others. They just search the internet for answers and watch garbage TV. Once everyone had the internet in their pocket, their long-term memories became like obsolete parts of their brain. A place to store worthless information like sports statistics and reality TV episodes. If they need information, they just take out their phones and look it up, but they never remember it. Just think about it. People just search for the answer to a question to solve a dispute at the dinner table, and then a week later the tech companies can just change the search result to something completely different. This is a big deal because this means that the next time that people searched for it, it never got stored up, since it never got stored up there. Let me restart that. This is a big deal because this means that the next time people searched for it, since it never got stored up here, Arrow pointed to his head, they don't even notice the change. They just accept the new truth. The real dangerous thing is they're not just altering historical facts. They're altering statistics, biology, 57 genders. Race is a social construct. They control reality for a large portion of the population. Regarding the specialization problem, most people have become just a small piece of equipment on an assembly line. You might think that's for efficiency, but that's not really why jobs have become so narrow in their scope. They want it to be as easy as possible to swap you out for another piece if you don't work out. That's one reason they want to keep the amount of training required to do your job simple. It needs to be simple enough for the average idiot so they can replace you with some low IQ dipshit without slowing down production. That's not the only reason, though. Now it's getting less about maintenance and more about future-proofing. The ultimate goal is to swap people out with automation because machines are stupid, so they can only replace stupid people. So designing a process that is made up of several stupid people that can be phased out over time makes the most sense. And making stupid people has lots of other benefits. It's really worked out for them. It's all about simplicity. and it's pretty simple to control stupid people. Not as easy as it is to control robots or software, but they'll take what they can get for now. They had both smiled at this. Arrow was preaching to the choir. Everyone in the movement understood all of this. Even the general public was starting to figure it out. But would they wake up in time? That's one of our problems. We need to acknowledge that our greatest weakness might be that we aren't naturals when it comes to controlling people, Ethan said. The idea doesn't appeal to me. I was raised to look after myself, live and let live. I was only motivated to get involved in politics because I wanted to run my own life and be left alone by the government and all the stupid people that they've been making. The stories are probably all bullshit propaganda, but I liked hearing about how George Washington didn't want to be president. That's how I feel. I feel like it would be easier for me to just take my money and go live somewhere far away, just watch the world burn. But I don't know. Maybe it's a sense of duty or something. Or maybe I'm just being practical. In order to be left alone, we have to first take control of the society that has been completely subverted, infiltrated, and invaded by people who do like control. People that value control over all else. These people we trusted to run things while we focused on our families and our personal lives failed to hold up their side of the social contract. And now we don't fix this shit. And now if we don't fix this shit, nobody will. Ethan smiled a dark smile and then shook his head and laughed as he continued to maneuver the heavy wheelbarrow through the tunnel. No, they didn't fail. They succeeded in betraying us, said Arrow. Every now and again, Arrow liked that he could see that there was still an innocence that was being kept alive inside Ethan's mind. Sometimes it would peek out into the darkness, and you would catch a glimmer in his eye. But Ethan was no fool. Every time that glimmer took one look at the world, and it retreated right back where it came from. He hoped someday they would live in a world where Ethan could indulge that part of himself again. So here we are, Ethan said. Patriots with no desire to control or rule over others. No desire to take advantage of those weaker or stupider than ourselves. We are faced with this fucked up paradox that for our society to survive and for our freedom to exist in our children's lifetimes, we have to seize control, wrangle the mob by force, and if we want to succeed, we can't just match the level of the brutality of our enemy. We have to extend their cruelty and become better manipulators. We just need to get people to understand that we are at war, Arrow said. Not some rhetorical war, but an actual, real, life and death war. Formally declared, and not just some figure of speech. Once we do that, things will get easier. And that's why we're in a fucking sewer in the middle of the night, Ethan said, laughing. We'll get the people behind this. Honestly, the reason we need people to call this a war and accept that we're in a war, a real legitimate war, is as any other war was Americans that have fought and died in, is that once we get people to accept that, the entire population of the country will radically change their moral code. We're programmed to operate with a different moral code when we're at war. This whole ethical minefield you and I have had to run through to get where we are isn't easy for most people. It wasn't even easy for us. War bypasses that. We can turn countless intelligent, gentle, empathetic men into cold-hearted killers just by convincing them that they are at war. Families will sacrifice their fathers and sons to support a war, and those sacrifices will have to be made. We'll just need them to snap out of their trance. I guess we should thank our enemy for the instruction manual on how to get there. People don't like war. So we just do what they've been doing for cons. It doesn't stop them, so we can't let it stop us. They know if the people don't want to go to war, they'll simply do a false flag. That's what they do, and it works. The people are already programmed and ready to go. After tonight, we'll have people that are ready to accept that we're at war, and if they aren't, we'll just have to turn up the heat. Yeah, I hope this does the trick, Arrow said. We have to be prepared to take things to the same extremes they do, Ethan said softly. 9/11 is the perfect example of the lengths at which our enemies are willing to go. These are the rules that they have written. And even though I hope we don't need to kill thousands of people to get support for our war, we need to understand that our enemy is willing to do exactly that. As distasteful, horrific, even evil as we might find our tactics like this as individuals, we have to be prepared to do what must be done. Amen, brother, said Arrow. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. But it is what it is. By the way, I think we're here. Arrow pointed at a series of large pipes. Ethan looked at his map with the help of Arrow's flashlight. Yeah, this is it. The plan had been Charlie's idea. He had the idea after seeing a communist meme that was complaining about the lack of clean water in Flint, Michigan. Flint's water supply had become contaminated. The city was bankrupt and lacked the funds to restore clean water, and so, for the last few years, the residents of Flint had been forced to use bottled water. Of course, the meme made no mention that the city government, county government, and really the entire state had been under total leftist control for decades. No. Instead, it was the rest of the country's fault, and greedy right-wingers who hated black people. Charlie had suggested that they contaminate the water in another leftist stronghold, San Francisco. Then they could pose as communist terrorists who were trying to demonstrate to the world that rich white people in San Francisco would have to get their water restored, while the poor blacks in Flint would have to go on without. Not only would this drive a wedge between the leftist elite and their unemployed foot soldiers and force the right to take the left's threats more seriously, but it would also likely be extremely costly to California. The state had been going through a drought for several years, and in addition to losing a portion of its precious water supply, the state's hypersensitive environmental laws would mean the cleanup costs would be astronomical. The Bay Area was also home to a large percentage of the state's economy. Depending on the severity of the contamination and the length of time it would take to complete the cleanup and restore water to the densely populated area, the operation could easily cost the state tens of billions of dollars. After studying San Francisco's water sources, the group had identified a few weak spots in the system. A surprising amount of California's water actually came from Arizona. It was delivered to California through a canal system that was fed by the Colorado River. Another canal system coming from the north supplemented much of the rest, because these canals spanned nearly the entire state. There were several pipelines delivering everything from raw sewage to gasoline that in certain places traveled under or over the water supply. The plan would be to rupture as many of these pipelines as possible and to do so simultaneously. Not only would this produce the contaminated water supply, but, if done correctly, it would deprive the state of things like fuel. If the group succeeded in shutting down the pipeline that delivered this gasoline to the southern half of the state, there would be riots for sure. This could be explained away by the communists giving the middle finger to the oil companies. The plan was perfect. Arrow and Ethan finished planting the explosives that would rupture the massive fuel line and then made their way out of the sewer tunnel. They returned to the motel they had rented about 20 miles south of what they thought would be the danger zone, but they really weren't too sure what to expect. This was the biggest and most complicated operation they had ever attempted. The explosives had two different stages. The first stage was simply a large amount of thermite that would be ignited directly on various large amounts. The first stage would be simply a large amount of thermite that would be ignited directly on the various pipelines where they intersected the waterway. This would ensure that the thick metal pipes would be penetrated, even if the second stage failed to perform at the level they had calculated for. The second stage was basically the equivalent of several giant pipe bombs. Charlie had been responsible for devising the explosives, and Ethan had been very impressed by the tests that they had performed in the middle of the Nevada desert. Ethan and Arrow had placed their timed devices on 6 different pipelines in 5 different locations up and down the state. They had the materials for the 6th location, however, they were unable to gain access to the pipeline, not wanting to let the explosive devices go to waste, Arrow had spotted a huge electrical transformer located outside of the fencing of a nearby electrical substation and strategically placed the thermite along with the secondary device where he thought it might do the most damage. The devices were activated by timers and, in theory, would be detonated at precisely 4:20 in the morning. It was now 4:15, and Ethan began pacing back and forth in the motel room. What if they don't go off? Are you sure you didn't leave anything behind? Ethan asked. Positivo. If they don't go off, that will suck. But I don't. A loud rumbling boom rattled the windows of their motel room. Ethan started laughing hysterically. For some reason, this had made him more nervous than anything he'd done concerning the list or anything of other operations. He was just glad to be past the point of no return. Now he could relax. It was time to sit back and enjoy the show. He turned the motel television on and scanned all the local channels. Local news would be probably the first on the scene, but there would be social media posts from people in the immediate vicinity before any camera crews showed up. He took out his phone and began to look for signs of their handiwork. There weren't any photos yet, just people talking about a bright flash or a boom. It seemed as though the last explosive they had placed had gone off a few minutes early. There were no other reports of explosions. Ethan checked the time. It was 4:19. He had wanted to use remotely triggered devices, but that would have added a layer of complexity and risk he wasn't comfortable with. Remotely triggered devices would also involve the use of burner phones and a network, which opened them up to even more risks. The timers were simple, as long as they worked. Just then, the lights in the motel room flickered and died, along with the TV. Oh shit, Hero said, laughing. This is going to be an interesting week. Just wait till I call Preacher, Ethan said. End of chapter 19.